quote, a and clean debt ceiling vote. Listen.
But I want to emphasize again that if a fiscal agreement is not reached in the coming weeks, in advance of August 2nd, then the debt limit must still be increased. And it's not an option for Congress to evade the basic responsibility to protect America's creditworthiness.
But our next guest says a clean vote will only lead to disaster down the road. Pennsylvania Republican Senator Pat Toomey joins us right now, who's on the Budget, Banking, Commerce, and Joint Economic Committees. Senator Toomey, welcome. What's your response to Geithner's warning? I want a clean bill by July.
Well, the problem with this administration is they want to raise the debt limit. They want us to authorize more borrowing so they can continue with spending and deficit spending as usual. We're at the end of that road. We're running a $1.5 trillion deficit this year. We're borrowing 40 cents of every dollar. We've had an explosion in spending, and we cannot continue this way. So some of us, myself very much included, are insisting that before I'm going to raise the debt limit, I'm going to insist on real cuts in spending and real reforms in a broken process that got us here.
Right. Now, you were here a couple of weeks ago and you said, Brian, I'm coming out with my own plan. When I asked you about Paul Ryan's plan, it's out. And amongst the things that you're saying, you say we should take our tax revenue, that's Paul Ryan, and then pay down the principal on our debt. How do you do that?
No, that's not what I've proposed. What I've suggested is something different. What I've said is that if we don't raise the debt limit on August 2nd, as the Treasury Secretary has insisted, that is not going to result in a default on our debt. Because ongoing tax revenue is going to be 10 times what we need to pay interest on our debt. And we can just roll over the principal. In other words, when a principal payment comes due, we can borrow from someone else to pay off the first guy. That's what the government does. We could continue that. The important thing is, even without an increase in the debt limit on August 2nd, there's no way we're going to default on our debt. And frankly, I think the administration ought to make that clear. It'd be disruptive, Brian. We'd have the equivalent of a partial government shutdown if the government can't borrow the big amounts of money that it wants to spend. But we shouldn't confuse that with a catastrophic default. We're not going to default under any circumstances.
But I just think it works for everybody if we use that as a deadline in which we help get our fiscal house in order and make some substantial gutsy cuts. Maybe people need a deadline in the big picture.
That's the best possible outcome. Best outcome is that the administration finally gets serious, realizes that borrowing and spending is not the way to prosperity, get some real spending cuts. Let's agree to statutory spending caps. I'd like to see a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. If we do those things, then we'd be on a path to solvency, and it'd be sustainable.
Well, Senator, a lot of people are counting on you to come up with something that's going to break the impasse and put a program forward. You said you would vote for Paul Ryan's plan if it was in front of you.
Sure.
But your plan is a little bit different. It doesn't touch entitlements. Is that correct?
No, mine does. Mine does the same thing with Medicaid, for instance. It block grants Medicaid to the state. Here's the big difference. What Paul Ryan and the House Republicans did, much to their credit, really a very serious, thoughtful, and courageous document. And you're right, I'm going to vote for it if it's on the floor here. They were looking out at permanent solvency. How do we permanently put our country on a footing so that we solve these long-term problems? I was focused on a more immediate challenge. How do we reach a balance within 10 years? Now, I think these are complementary efforts, frankly, and I agree with the big tax reform, with the spending cuts. Actually, we cut spending a little bit more deeply than the House Republican budget does, because that's what it takes to get to a balance within 10 years. But I think that's really important. I think that's necessary.
All right, Senator, there's a lot out there. A lot of people's heads are spinning about what plan is what. The bottom line is hopefully both sides come together and get our fiscal house in order, because it's not currently. Senator Pat Toomey, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right, coming up straight ahead. Just last week, the president told us far fewer people